what was reported on CNN. Barak Ravid, the Axios journalist, was talking about the meeting. We had the 28-point document, peace plan,
Yes.
on the part of the president of the United States. Then aftermath, there was a meeting in Geneva between, among the Secretary of State of the United States, Marco Rubio, together with Europeans, and the Zelensky, the delegation, Ukrainian delegation. Here is what Barak Ravid reported about that meeting.
What happens then?
Well, I think that President Zelensky understood very well how high the stakes are. And that's why he did not rule out the Trump plan. He did not say no. And he said, I'm willing to negotiate based on this U.S. peace plan. And I think he's going to continue to do that. And I think what he's going to do, or is going, in my assessment, is going to be very similar to a sentence that a former Israeli Prime Minister Levi Eshkol said in the 1960s, when he said, I'm compromising and compromising and compromising until I get what I want. And I think this is what President Zelensky is trying to do right now. Just another word about the security guarantee. As far as I know, and I saw the initial draft security guarantee that the US gave Ukraine, I think this is the most significant security guarantee that President Trump agreed to give any country, especially Ukraine. And this was the baseline for the negotiations. Since then, the security guarantee got stronger. And it is modeled, it's not an Article 5 guarantee, that's for sure, but it is pretty close to an Article 5 guarantee, and this is significant.
John, before going to your comments, here is what Lavrov said about the plan.
Stand. The key proposals from the Trump plan are based on the understanding reached in Anchorage during the Russian-American summit that was held in August. And those principles are generally reflected in the plan, which we have welcomed, as President Putin said, because after Anchorage, there was a long pause. Now, this pause has ended with this document being proposed. We have not yet been handed this document officially, even though we had received it through informal channels. But of course, some language requires clarification, and we have not yet received the definitive version from the United States, or the version that is being speculated about by the media. And those who engage in this kind of megaphone diplomacy certainly have their own goals. There were some comments from Macron and from others that those are unacceptable terms, that it would be capitulation for Ukraine. But what matters is whether Ukraine is willing to engage in such an agreement. And until the final agreement is reached, the terms are confidential. And those who are trying to analyze the documents that were leaked deliberately to blow up the hype in the media. They're trying to undermine the efforts of Donald Trump. They're trying to skew the plan for their own agenda.
Go ahead, John. What's your take and what's going on?
Well, it's a very good question. I need to explain to our audience that I'm using a camera and a device while I'm traveling that doesn't allow me to look directly at a camera, look directly at the evidence, look directly at you and the audience. So pardon me for appearing to look rightwards when everything that's going on here is in fact leftwards. First things. We don't need an Israeli citing Israeli officials to advise us on what's happening no Israeli has the competence or information base to tell us what's happening in this war first. So let's forget what Mr. Barak David said in Axios. Second, what's happening here is very different on the Russian side, on the Ukrainian side, the American side, from what's being printed. And what's not being printed, let's try to unpack. In the first place, we have a series of meetings in which the US is trying to conceal its retreat from an inevitable defeat in the Ukraine war. That's a Trump lose, lose, lose. As we've said before, Nima, Trump psychologically, the US politically and strategically thinks it must always win, win, win. This is a retreat. The terms of retreat are very heavily camouflaged here. All sides want to continue the war, leaving aside Russia, of course. What's at stake here are the terms of continuing a long war while camouflaging the pause to stop or provide a pause in the short war. So there's a difference between the sides on short war terms. On the other hand, what we have is a general agreement on the part of the United States government, the Trump administration, the NATO allies, all of them, and the Ukrainians, whoever's in charge in the Ukrainian General Staff and in Kiev politically, on the terms for continuing the war in Russia and somehow avoiding total military defeat, preserve enough of a short war pause, short of capitulation, total capitulation, and total end of a short war on Russian terms. So between short war pause and long war continuation, we have a lot of different attempts at reaching accommodation. All of that said, what do we really have here? What we have is the elimination of General Kellogg as the intermediary between a European and Ukrainian combination, plus their US supporters in carrying their terms to Russia. We have the replacements of interest, important interest. Army Secretary Driscoll, a chum, classmate at Yale of Vice President Vance, plus General Randy George, the Army Chief of Staff, plus General Donahue, General Commanding U.S. Army in Europe and Asia, plus 2 or 3 other generals. I'm just looking at my papers to see if I can catch the names. They appeared in Geneva. You can see General George in the background. I'm not sure that I recognize General Donahue at the table. You also have, and it's important to notice, Jared Kushner. Kushner represents the money interests of the Trump family. That's important. For the first time, you have two money men, Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner, representing points 13 and 14 of the so-called, what are we calling it, 28-point plan that the Trump administration produced. Those are the terms under which Russia would give up the notion that it had lost, had stolen, had confiscated $300 billion euros worth of sovereign reserves, allowing $100 billion to be invested under Kushner, Witkoff, U.S. administrative and directorial control in purported investments in the Ukraine, with 50% of the profitability going into the U.S. side, meaning Kushner, Witkoff, and the Trump family. This is a very important transformation of Russian sovereign reserves into Trump personal profit-making. That's rather unique. We also had, having to speak without the notes of point 14 in front of me, the redirection of the balance of the sovereign reserves, announced until now as a theft. theft of Russian reserves and assets into a fund for joint US-Russian investment, essentially under US and Russian individual control. It's the privatization of the sovereign funds of Russia. That's a unique form of privatization. You could also call it Yeltsin-era stealing. It's a unique combination as part of a war, of a pause of a short war settlement. And there was Kushner and Witkoff at the table negotiating it the other day. Now, what we've had is over the last few hours in Geneva and then in Abu Dhabi, attempts made to change those terms. What we understand, and all of us are in a position, the same position. You can read the New York Times version, you can read the CBS version, you can read Fox News versions. They all come from briefings given by Driscoll himself or his spokesman and others in the US delegation who do not identify the Russian delegation in Abu Dhabi. That's significant because, as we'll come to in a minute, it appears that the Russian delegation in Abu Dhabi did not include any significant figure from the Russian Foreign Ministry known to Foreign Minister Lavrov. What that suggests is the counterpart Russians who were met in Abu Dhabi included Kirill Dmitriev, possibly Vladimir Medinsky from the Kremlin. This is a very significant shift in the way in which the Russian side appear to be dealing with Kushner, Witkoff, Rubio, and others. We are informed by the press that on the Ukrainian side, there was Yermak, Umerov, possibly Budanov. We know of no military figure on the Russian side sitting opposites in one room or another, across one table or another, of a comparable Russian military figure. So what we appear to have is a bunch of money men on the American side, a bunch of money men on the Moscow side, and no military, no one representing the Russian army that fought and achieved what they've done to date. That's unique, and I need to emphasize it to everybody. No military representation, no diplomatic representation. What has come out of this is apparently an agreement that there will be no border set in the agreement, no lines defined. That's incredible. No military representation on the Russian side to negotiate the way in which the lines would be drawn along the lines of contact. No lawyer representing the Russian side to reflect the Russian terms under which from the beginning of the special military operation to define what is Russian territory which has been won. The 4 Novorossiyan regions that have been incorporated constitutionally and legally in the Russian Federation, plus Crimea. No one is representing the Russian side yet to negotiate that in Abu Dhabi. And therefore, what is being discussed in Abu Dhabi is something quite different. We have been told, and I'm looking at my notes, there is no longer a limit on the Ukrainian army. As many of our audience knows, Nima, you've had colleagues who've made a point of indicating that in the original Istanbul 1 agreement, the Russian side proposed 85,000 men cap on the Ukrainian military. That was April 2022. The Ukrainian side, backed by the US, I believe, saw 250,000 men cap. I may be wrong, a few thousand. And suddenly, after 3 years of total destruction of the Ukrainian army, the number shot up from 85,000 or 220-odd thousand in 2022. Before, at the beginning of the special military operation, the number shot up to 600,000 Over the weekend in Geneva, it shot up to 800,000. And now in Abu Dhabi, we're told that all limits on the Ukrainian military that would survive the armistice, let's say, the pause of the short war, all limits on the Ukrainian army would be removed. In other words, the pause that would refresh the Ukrainian army following its massive defeat by the Russian army. Now, nobody can recall terms of armistice in which a victorious army accepts a pause for such a ceasefire with refreshment as this represents. In addition, I'm looking again at my notes. We're told in all the sources leaking out of Abu Dhabi that there's the amnesty issues is no longer in the quotes 19-point or foreshortened agreement, the Abu Dhabi agreement, let's call it, Geneva modified to Abu Dhabi. There is, no agreement on boundaries we've mentioned, no agreement banning NATO forces inside Ukraine. There are probably many other measures, but what are we looking at here? It's hard to believe there were any Russian delegation, even Mr. Dmitriev, and certainly Mr. Medinsky are hardly likely to agree on the fundamental abandonment of the principal requirements of the special military operation. No ban on NATO troops in the Ukraine means a reinforcement of the Ukrainian warfighting platform of Russia, which has been defeated and is in the process of total annihilation. First. Second, no limit on the Ukrainian army means the rebuilding of the Ukrainian army in the peace that would follow. It makes no sense militarily for a pause at this point, leading, as the Russian side expects, for a long war to continue, and on which the Russian side has attempted for several years to find a solution to prevent the long war continuing. No agreement at all that would limit the ability of NATO to reinforce and rebuild everything the Russian army has won. Haven't I said enough? It is simply incredible that an Anglo-American press would report Russian agreement in Abu Dhabi to such a surrender of all the objectives already won and all of the objectives set out since the Foreign Ministry tabled the December 17, 2021 proposal for mutual assured security and non-aggression in Europe between Russia, the United States, and NATO. Who is surrendering here? Why don't I leave it as a question? It's a rhetorical question. Doesn't everyone listening understand the answer?